Okay, we're going to begin. Good afternoon or good morning to everyone, depending on where you are joining us. My name is Dr. Marie Salambini. I will be giving you a brief background for today's webinar and housekeeping before turning it over to our moderator for the webinar. I am currently beginning my fourth year as an assistant professor of practice at the University of Texas at Arlington School of Social Work, where I engage in research and teaching in topics related to micro and macro areas of practice in social work. On behalf of the 13th Grand Challenge of Social Work National Steering Committee, I'm excited to say welcome to our guests who are joining us on Zoom and on YouTube. Today's webinar is the third part of a 7-part series dedicated to the 13th Grand Challenge, Eliminate Racism. Because this is our newest of the Grand Challenges with a focus on the urgent crisis of racism in society, the National Webinar Working Group has organized the series to highlight why eliminating racism should be a lens from which each of us view the other grand challenges. We had our series lunch in June with our esteemed speaker, Dr. Patricia Reed Merritt, who gave us a strong charge to continue to work no matter the challenges ahead. Our second webinar focused on the grand challenges to promote the challenges ahead of decarceration and achieve equal opportunity and justice. We were excited to hear from experts on the ground in Franklin County, Ohio, as they work to eliminate racism in these two areas of the grand challenges. Now today, we are excited to be learning in the grand challenges of reducing extreme economic inequality and building financial capacity and assets for all. We hope that today you get a snapshot of tangible examples of how we can eliminate racism in these grand challenge areas. As I've asked in previous webinars, let us first commit to first listen and then engage with one another today for what we hope will be an instructive session. Of course, there are a few housekeeping notes to ensure everyone has the best experience. First, we are excited to have two audiences, Zoom and YouTube, so we will engage with them both during this webinar. Second, all Zoom attendees can communicate, interact in the chat box. Zoom attendees do not have the ability to speak or go on camera. Question and answer for Zoom attendees. Can enter your questions through the question and answer feature on the control bar at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Attendees will also have the ability to see questions submitted by other attendees. If someone has the same or a similar question, you can upvote the questions. This will allow me as the moderator to determine which questions are popular amongst the audience because we will only have about 10 minutes for question and answer today. The question and answer feature is a separate feature for the chat box. So be sure to enter any questions that you really have to have answered by the speaker in the question and answer feature. YouTube attendees, you can enter your questions or thoughts in the comment section under the live video. We will monitor those questions and read them live. That's it for housekeeping. So now I will pass the baton over to our moderator for the panel, Dr. Trina Shanks, who is the director of the School of Social Work Community Engagement, the Harold R. Johnson Collegiate Professor for Social Work, and a faculty associate for the Survey Research Center, Institute of Social Research. Dr. Shanks, thank you so much for your participation here today. We look forward to it.
Thank you, Marie. Thank you, Jandel and Quincy, for organizing this webinar. I'm looking forward to the conversation. As was mentioned, I'm one of the 3 co-leads for the Grand Challenge to Reduce Extreme Economic Inequality, along with Laura Lane and Jenny Romich. And I also participate in the Grand Challenge to Build Financial Capability and Assets for All, which is led by Julie Birkenmeyer, Jin Wong, and Margaret Sherrod. I will make a few quick points of introduction before turning the conversation over to our 3 esteemed panelists. After the civil rights era and the legislative successes of the 1960s, There were moments of progress in educational attainment and access to voting, but really not much improvement at all in racial gaps within the economic realm. Economic inequality has remained constant, and in the case of wealth, became even worse. In fact, historically, there's frequently been a violent response to Black economic progress. The 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Massacre has been in the news lately, but that's just one example of the violence experienced by Black and Brown Americans just trying to make a living and support their families. I'll offer a few data points to illustrate longstanding economic inequalities by race. If you look at unemployment as of January 2020, just before the pandemic, when the country was supposedly thriving with unemployment rates at historic lows, unemployment was 3% for whites, 4.3% for Hispanic Latinx families, and 6.1% for Blacks. Looking at this statistic since 1975, rates go up and down with recession and recovery, but relative positions remain almost exactly the same, with Blacks having twice the unemployment rate of whites and other groups falling in between. Very similar with median household income. The country as a whole is about 63,000, but it's over 70,000 for whites, about 51,000 for Hispanic Latinx households, and 41,000 for Blacks. And again, with recessions and recoveries, it goes up and down, but relative standing stays exactly the same. And it's important to note that wealth, although distinct from income, the inequalities are even more stark. And this is because it captures disparities that have been built across generations and not what can be earned by working in one lifetime. And so looking at 2019 net worth, which is a total of everything of value that a household owns minus everything they owe, it was 188,000 for white households, but only 36,000 for Hispanic Latinx households and 24,000 for Black households. Wealth is of course more volatile, but depending on the year, Black and Latinx households have only 5 to 15 cents on the dollar for every dollar of wealth held by white households. And if you're looking at financial capability, there are also racial differences in the likelihood of being banked, having access to credit, and even the terms one is offered for a loan or a mortgage. And although many want to place the onus on individual financial choices, this is an area where institutional and structural change at the policy level is most essential. I'd like to make a quick caveat though, by sharing that data by race and ethnicity in this way does not allow for nuance or intersectionality. There are distinctions by age, gender, marital status, education level. Similarly, there are important distinctions even within groups. So for example, although Asians on average have higher incomes than whites and other racial and ethnic groups, there's great variation in the data broken down by national origin. So Vietnamese, Cambodian, Burmese are doing much worse than say Indian or Japanese households. But most importantly, behind each statistic that I've noticed are the stories of real people living in actual communities. Our panelists today will share their experiences working at the intersection of race and economic status. I'm excited to hear how they describe the work that they're doing on the ground to help reduce economic inequality and build financial capability for all. So now I will turn to our three panelists. I'll introduce them all, but then allow them to go as they will in turn. Our first panelist is Renee Kobiatis, and she is currently serves on the Board of Trustees for the Movement Alliance Project and the Steering Committee of Latino Action Network. She's a licensed social worker in New Jersey, holds an MSW from Temple University and a BSW from Rutgers University. And she is the statewide advocacy coordinator for the National Association of Social Workers New Jersey chapter. So we look forward to hearing what she says about what's going on in the state of New Jersey. After she gives her opening comments, she will turn it over to Kevin Pierre. He was born in Trinidad and Tobago and came to the United States in 1984. He's on the advisory council for UndocuBlack. He's on the Civil Rights Commission for the Township of Montclair, New Jersey. He's the NAACP Political Action Committee and Criminal Justice Committee. And he runs he's on the coordinating committee for Poor People's Campaign for New Jersey. We look forward to what he has to say as well. And then when he is done with his opening remarks, he'll turn it over to Don Jones. Don Jones has been Associate Director for the New Economy Initiative for Southwest Michigan. a project of the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan. But he just retired, I believe, last week. You can correct me if I'm wrong, John. But even though he's retired, he's so excited about these issues. He's coming to speak with us today. He's spent a lot of time with the creation and support of Neighborhood Business Initiative Work Table that includes more than 35 nonprofit and for-profit organizations that provide support services to small businesses. So he's going to talk a lot about how small businesses have been affected during the pandemic. And with that, I will stop talking and turn it over to Renee, and I look forward to hearing what all of our panelists have to say. So Renee, go right ahead.
Thank you, Trina, and thank you so much for the invitation to be here with these esteemed panelists sharing information. Just one correction, I several years ago was with the National Association of Social Workers of New Jersey, and for the last 5 years, I have been the executive director of the Anti-Poverty Network of New Jersey. And in May of this year, we joined forces with a larger nonprofit that we've worked closely with, New Jersey Citizen Action, which is a statewide coalition grassroots organization that fights for social, racial, and economic justice, where the Anti-Poverty Network is still a statewide program. So again, thank you. I am a social worker, as Trina said, grew up on welfare in Camden County, New Jersey. So I certainly know what it's like to, not have food in the refrigerator or the cabinets and go to school and know that that situation wasn't going to change when I came home. And I think what we really need, to shift, make the kinds of shifts we need to in this nation towards true racial equity and economic equality. Is we need a shift in priorities as a society. Policies that truly recognize the dignity and worth of every person, where we're all able to meet our basic needs. We have had wage stagnation in this nation, if you track the US Department of Labor data, since the early 1970s. And so certainly here in New Jersey, we lost a number of high, mid, and low wage jobs in the Great Recession, and mostly replaced them with lower wage jobs by the time we fully recovered, one of the last states in the nation to recover in 2016. And then certainly we are now visited by a similar crisis that has really exacerbated and laid bare the economic and racial disparities that have always existed for a long time. And so we are working towards trying to make sure that the policies that are put in place now over these last 18 months or so truly recognize the worth of every person here in New Jersey, so that we are not just building back, but building something different, and really providing for the outcomes in the next several years that will truly lift people up. And so, just to touch quickly on a few things, why do we know that there's income inequality and structural racism in New Jersey? Because there is a 23-year life expectancy gap between the wealthiest and poorest zip codes in our state. 23-year difference in life expectancy, right? We are lacking over 200,000 affordable homes across our state for people at different income levels. Our TANF, which is a very racist program in terms of its creation in '96 and its goals, its stated goals. We saw a decline in enrollment and eligibility for that program here in New Jersey of 91% between 1996 with welfare reform and 2018, right? So this program is barely reaching the poorest of the poor, the very people in very deep poverty. It's supposed to meet people at 50% of the federal poverty level. We are only meeting people at 30% or below the federal poverty level in that program. And we know that 8 out of 10 children in that program are Black or Latino, with 2/3 of children in poverty in the state being Black and Latino as well. 66% of African American and 62% of Latino students attend schools in our state that are more than 75% non-white, right? That doesn't just mean that these children are getting access to, less adequate education and resources, but it means that all children are not benefiting from the kinds of experiences that come from a diverse student body and the education the collaborative education that can come from that. And we also have a state lawsuit that was filed in 2018 by Latino Action Network and several other organizations against the state for segregation in our schools. And we are still awaiting, outcome and resolution of that lawsuit, which may heat up a little bit later this year. So ways that New Jersey Citizen Action and our partners are working towards making things more equitable coming out of this pandemic. We are, pushing for the child tax credit to become permanent, monthly, and refundable. We certainly would like to see more earned income tax credit expansions at the federal level, but we have seen our state tax credit, EITC, move from 25% of the federal level back in 2015 to 40% of the federal EITC level last year. We also expanded this year to adults who are 18 years and older, and adults who are 65 and older, who are not currently raising children, which is a huge help to those folks. Improving access to paid leave policies, which we have some of the best here in the state of New Jersey, but certainly would like to see them expanded even more, especially in the midst of a pandemic to protect workers, and also to see those changes at the federal level. Certainly access to home ownership. In 2018 or 2019, I should say, I was also part of a group of advocates who helped pass what's called New Jersey Secure Choice, which will provide, it hasn't been put in place yet and got pushed back a little bit by the pandemic, but will provide access to 401k type retirement account for all low wage workers who don't have access to retirement savings accounts through their employers, typically, like restaurant workers, retail workers, et cetera, right? Our lowest wage workers in the state. So our state's working towards that. That law was passed in 2019. We also have seen our governor propose baby bonds, for all children in the budget last year. That didn't get passed, but certainly may come up after the election this year. We have our big election with the gubernatorial and all state offices being held in November here in New Jersey. And then we also were part of the efforts to get the millionaires tax established last October in New Jersey to really begin to create more true tax fairness, so that we don't keep building our state budgets on the backs of the poorest and working poor in our state. So I'm there and turn it over to Kevin.
Oh, okay, that's a tough one to follow up. I'll start with the double unemployment rate and try to transition over to education. There over the history of every time we have an economic downturn, we keep seeing that African Americans, no matter what, and no matter all the efforts that have been made, we have always seen a double unemployment rate. And no matter what the studies or organizations we have, state or federal, we keep seeing the same numbers keep popping up no matter what. And we keep getting these, which I think is just half-ass excuses of why that is. And I think it has to go with a combination of things. And one has to do with our educational system. And I'll make an example real quick. During the crash, I was a bartender for a while, and I would safely say, like, we had the most educated bartenders in the state of New Jersey and New York. We all had degrees in psychology, which was when the crash happened, that was one of the most devalued college degree. But in saying that, I want to say this as well. Our educational system still pushes tons of students to going to studying psychology, not emphasizing that program really doesn't lead to very much. We have jobs that are not being filled, like plumbers and electricians, which are very well paying jobs, but we have a price tag, because I work in education, a price tag on every student's head. It is a business, and we have to realize those students are a business, and those students should be steered towards areas that have deficits that they could make a decent wage. We have failed in that area of society. We keep pushing students into purely college education instead of apprenticeship education. And I think that's one of our huge failures in society. If we could make a transition like that, I personally think we'll see something positive. When it comes to housing, we since the ending of slavery, you could look from the Panhandle all the way up to New Jersey, and it's just one big, just hockey stick of African American concentration. We have not made very much in mobility as expanding across the country for opportunity. Okay, we're hearing about fracking or whatever, or energy, but you don't see migration the same exact way. I think I can't pinpoint and say it's discriminatory practices, but it does seem to show a pattern that we haven't taken the cream cheese spreader and spread ourselves all over this country because we are not included. Look at Seattle. Seattle has a history of excluding African Americans from migrating to the western part of this country. That's part of housing. And there are, when it comes to areas of gentrification right now, gentrification happens in even my own town, where all that was added was one train line and housing prices doubled and tripled. So those dead cities out west, all you need to do with an infrastructure program is create a system to have either highways built, train lines built, and we could revitalize it and revitalize certain economies, build housing, extend minorities, reach out for more opportunities. There's so much we can do. On top of it, we have to really look at penalties for discriminatory practices. And an example is, there was a humongous opportunity during the financial crash, a humongous opportunity where I saw houses being sold for $85,000 and being doubled in the next year. But Citibank clearly discriminated by color. They apologized after. Forget about the apology. The damage was done. If you discriminate at parts of pivotal points in history where there is opportunity, the Western expansion, there's so many times that we have been excluded as people of color from those kind of economic opportunities. And then all we get is, I'm sorry, that really doesn't work, because at the end of the day, we are still twice as likely to be unemployed, and our equity, is what? What's the equity difference? It's like 7.8 times between the disparity between black and white. And we've been here in the country together for hundreds of years. That says that there is a systematic structure that allows that to happen. And until we start really truly attacking that, without question or without making the lack of education. And I don't want to delve into the numbers of education, because there was a point in the 90s where African Americans actually had more associate's degrees because of college programs. So all of a sudden, once African Americans started getting these associate's degrees, people started and you were actually getting really good jobs back before that point with an associate. All of a sudden, it turned around and say, well, and culturally we changed the tone of what an associate degree meant. And then the tone changed to, well, it's the equivalent of a high school diploma. All of a sudden, an associate became the zeitgeist of going through college and getting an associate changed. The slide rule changed because we, at that point, had a 1% more than our counterparts degrees because of incentive program. So when it comes down to it, the language changes, and in between all of our efforts, when we start changing that language around and playing around with that, like you could look at sports history, basketball, football. Those are all sports and that were said that, oh, it's a cerebral sport. Well, all of a sudden, once Black people start getting into it, right, and getting included in it, it wasn't cerebral anymore. So there's so much racism embedded in society, but the thing is that we don't have enough of checks and balance systems like the EEOC that really investigate and really try to counter those ills in society. And I as much as I keep looking, and I've even called the EEOC on discriminatory practices in companies, they really don't have the structure to change, mitigate, or stop that kind of damage from happening to people that have been marginalized in society. And I think if that doesn't work, we need to create a new system. If a company shows discriminatory practices, if a realtor shows discriminatory practices, if anybody shows discriminatory practices, the penalties need to be need to be a lot harsher than they are right now. It really is just a slap in the wrist. And I think, and once that starts happening, I want to finish with education real quick. I think we, again, and I think I said this before, we really do need to push our kids into saying college is not the only way, and actually start showing them, look, apprenticeship programs, which is hundreds of years old, and has shown to be a great way of gaining wealth and creating a name in your own community. If I want to become a plumber and make $65 an hour, great. I could go to college and get my bachelor's degree and come out making $15 an hour working at McDonald's. Which one would I choose? I would choose to be a plumber. And be able to create your own business in your own hours and say, you know what, I'm going to create an empire. You're not going to create an empire with a bachelor's degrees in psychology. And I'm using that as an example because I remember all the pitfalls I went to after that economic crash. I was like, man, I'm going to make, I got a job offer making $75,000. That crash happened. It was like, what happened to that job interview? Nope, not worth the paper it's printed on. So I don't know if I deviated too much. I apologize if I did, but who is next that I should pass it to?
Thanks so much, Kevin. I'll pass
Okay, Don, pass it to Mr. Don Jones.
Thanks so much, Kevin. Again, thanks Trina and company for inviting me today. I'm going to give you a quick outline of what I want to cover in my 10 minutes or so. What New Economy Initiative, what we're all about is small business and asset building. So I'll tell you a little bit about the New Economy Initiative, what we mean by small businesses, that is micro businesses, COVID-19, how that further informed us about the inequities that Renee and Kevin have been talking about, and some really short-term, short horizon recommendations as we think about this. So first, just that quick background on NEI, the New Economy Initiative. It's a project of the Community Foundation of Southeast Michigan, for Southeast Michigan. It was first conceived and created in 2007 as a response to the recession that had first plagued Michigan and then hit the entire country. And the initial purpose, was to diversify the local economy of Southeast Michigan, and most of you know, very automotive focused, and to build upon the assets of geography, talent, and the businesses here, with a focus on inclusion and equity. As the work developed over these last 13 years, we really honed our focus on helping to build a network of support for small businesses, that is neighborhood businesses. And we see this as an and strategy. That is, there is a need for high growth businesses and it's necessary for economic growth. But neighborhood businesses, which of course can become high growth businesses, are an important asset building strategy and can be a tool of necessity for historically underserved and marginalized people, Blacks, women, immigrants, the LGBTQ community, and others. Since the project began in 2007, the business support network we have built has supported his work with about 19,000 companies in South, mostly in the Detroit area. And in 2020, this last year, we worked with about 4,900 companies. 60% of those companies are led by Black and other people of color, and 70% are by women. I do want our objective to be clear and easy to understand. It is to support micro business growth in underserved communities in order to grow jobs, increase wealth for historically underserved and marginalized people, improve neighborhoods, and advance equity and equality. So NEI's primary focus, as I said, is to provide direct support of providers of services, what we call business support organizations, to micro businesses, those 2 to 10 employee sized businesses. Small businesses by the SBA is defined as businesses that are 500 employees or less. We very much focused on this, as I said, businesses in the 2 to 10, 2 to 25 area, where 70% of the businesses in this country fit that definition. We know that COVID-19 did create the problems, did not create the problems of discrimination and inequity that we were hoping to address. As I think Renee said, it laid them bare, it illuminated them, and made them just that much more obvious. In response to COVID-19, NEI would support a philanthropy and work quickly with our nonprofit partners to get relief to businesses. There were 4 specific programs that we implemented in about 90 days back in April and June of last year. Of course, at that time, we were thinking that perhaps the pandemic would be 6 months, 9 months, and such like that. If we could help these businesses through a short term, that then when the pandemic, quote, ended, then they would be able to get back up on and go. So a couple of 4 programs we provided. We did loan relief. We provided 6 months of loan payments for about 228 businesses with an average payment of $800 a month. This was not a deferral. We actually made their loan payments for 6 months because we did not want them to, when they came out of this, having to figure out what they were going to do to make back those back payments. We provided rent relief to about 500 businesses for 3 to 4 months of payments for them, and that was an average payment of about $4,000. We also supported some stabilization funds where we made grants to about 1,100 businesses in metropolitan Detroit with an average payment of $1,700 per business. And we did practical assistance for about 600 businesses in the areas of marketing, employee retention, and assistance with federal and state programs. So we did, in about a 3-month period, made $5 million in grants to these businesses. And we were very aware, this was only a Band-Aid. We were not solving, we were not addressing anything. And I might add, just to the credit of my colleagues, when I talk about all these programs, there are 3 staff people in our program that did this work over that period of time. You know, the reason why I retired, I was just exhausted. We also did a survey. We really need to find out more about what was happening. So to learn how businesses were being affected by COVID-19, we sent out a survey in December of last year and January of 2021. And we received about 600 responses. And here's some key data and some takeaways. So most of the respondents were Black-owned micro businesses located in Wayne County, Michigan, which is the city of Detroit is inside Wayne County, Michigan. And many operate what we call Main Street businesses, that is retail and other type sectors. 40% had 2 or fewer employees, and 38% had $25,000 or less revenue. Quick point on that is that oftentimes these very small revenue numbers, people in the banking industry and other areas think of this as, oh, these are not real businesses. This is a side hustle. This is not what they do. But when you look at the numbers that Trina was talking about, and I think Kevin did too, when you look at household income in the city of Detroit, Trina can correct me, but I think the average household income is around $31,000, $32,000. $25,000 isn't a side hustle. This is a core part of the household income for those households. Second, we saw that access to federal relief programs was low in Southeast Michigan overall, and especially for businesses owned by people of color and women. Notably, all the businesses of color that applied and were approved at lower rates than white-owned businesses. And female-owned businesses were also less likely to apply for federal programs, the PPP program, the EIDLs, and such like that, and were also less likely to be approved. So these are just, again, sort of very surface data that we have. I can be happy to share with you all sorts of tables and such like that about what we learned from these 600 businesses. But again, as I said earlier, it was illuminating the inequity. It was laying bare the inequity. It did not create this inequity. So based on this, what we are recommending for both public and philanthropic support going forward is based on our work over these past years, and especially this past COVID-19 work. But even more important, it's listening to what these small businesses have told us, such as through the survey. So one, of course, more loan capital is necessary, and how to make it available at lower rates than even community development financial institutions provide. Lower than 5 to 8% loans is needed. Loan loss reserves, this is what helps a finance institution tolerate loss to make sure that those are fully funded and perhaps have a higher tolerance of loan loss. Banks don't, banking system, if they have a loan loss of 1%, they find themselves to be in deep trouble with regulators. But nonprofit lenders and CDFIs should be offered the opportunity to have a higher tolerance of loan loss in order to be taking more opportunities to reach deeper into communities. Collateral support should be provided because often in low-income communities, they don't have enough collateral available to get significant loans. If your house, going back to 2008 and such, where you had foreclosure and now we've had tax foreclosure, if the value of your house is lost, for most people, that is the collateral they use. So collateral support is needed in order to help these businesses get the money that they need in order to borrow. Loan guarantees, again, both philanthropy and also we're looking at new federal dollars from ARP and such like that could actually be used to help with loan guarantees. And then new loan products, credit building loans, which is different than credit repair. This is actually to help people that have either low credit scores or no credit scores, small loans that become paid back and help them increase their credit scores and then make them more able to apply for loans. And then there's also revenue loan models. And what that means is rather than a straight up loan where you borrow and you're going to pay X per month, as your business grows its revenue, you pay back your loan based upon that growth in revenue. So it's helping businesses to either can be stretched out or in some ways can be accelerated as the business grows. The second thing is the support for practical assistance and operating support for these nonprofit lenders. This is really high touch work, working with historically marginalized and underserved communities. So much is needed, assistance is needed for the businesses that we want to encourage to start and grow. So getting their financial books in shape to borrow is necessary in order to move beyond small loans. Small businesses were left out of receiving PPP for a variety of systemic reasons, but there was also left out because they did not have their financial records in place and actually to apply for those loans. So this problem must be addressed. And the digital divide. For marketing and sales and borrowing money, knowledge and use of digital tools is necessary. And this has to include broadband access, but appropriate and up-to-date hardware and software for finance and marketing, and know-how and or access to expertise on use. And this has to be constantly updated. This is not a one and done issue. As we all know, we update our, if we're able to update our laptops or update our surfaces or update, every 2 or 3 years, you're like, oh my God, I got something new, nothing runs anymore. Well, this for a small business, becomes a necessary tool. And with all of these, there's a need for high quality, one-to-one support for extended periods of time. Webinars, classes and such like that are helpful for addressing the what people need to know, but it's the one-to-one that is going to help them grow and thrive and their company to grow and thrive. Finally, on the public policy side, there's much that needs to be done that requires radical change. How do we create an economic system that at its core is more equitable? And the current model is not equitable, as both Kevin and Renee were talking about. So with that said, what might be done within the existing model that could be help move the needle some. So public policy must turn its attention to the value of small businesses, especially those started by historically underserved and exploited and from whom wealth has been extracted. Again, as I was saying earlier, SBA and others think of small businesses as 500 and less. There actually is a focus on both the ARP and something called SSBCI, which is part of ARP, which is a state small business credit enhancement program with a focus on small businesses 2 to 10. But for instance, report after report after report shows that Black women are starting businesses at a much more significant rate than any other demographic. So we need to provide similar tax incentives, state tax relief, brownfield type subsidies, and other creative approaches to lower their tax burden as they're trying to grow their businesses. These are where jobs are, and jobs that will stick. These businesses don't move out of the region. They are grounded in their communities. So finally, why do we do this? The focus of NEI's work is business development instead of asset building tools. It is not the do all and end all. The things that Renee is talking about, the things that Kevin, all these things need to be addressed. We're focusing on this small business area. But we do believe that a comprehensive economic strategy is what we're talking about, as well as understanding that high growth is needed. And so we've evolved, I said, to focus on neighborhood businesses. It is a wealth building program for business owners and their families. And it's a key component of a community development strategy. There must be the improvement in addressing of public spaces, of housing, education, infrastructure, and as we say, neighborhood business development. At the end, this is both addressing the issues of equity and growing an economy that recognizing the changing and wonderful demographics that we are becoming. Pragmatically, if we are to grow the economy, then it must recognize and address those who have been left out. In the words of our friends over at PolicyLink, equity is the superior growth model. So thanks a lot.
Wow, thank you to our three panelists. You guys said so much in about 30 minutes. There's some questions that are in the chat that I will revive to give you a chance to say to the audience. And then I'll have a few questions. And please, if you have questions that you haven't asked yet, put it in the chat or put in the question, and we will be monitoring. Thank you, Jandel and Quincy, to make sure that we don't miss any of those. Renee, you answered this in the chat, but since there are some innovative things that are happening in New Jersey, can you say a little bit more about the millionaire tax and the baby bonds and what you see those things might contribute if they're passed or when they're passed?
Sure. So the millionaire's tax was actually passed last October 1st. The year prior, we had also proposed a millionaire's tax, or a governor did, but we only taxed people at 5 million above. So last year, October, we are now taxing people at 1 million above. So the tax rate went from 8.97% for millionaires to 10.75, which is a much fairer tax rate, to create tax fairness, because that's generally what lower income people are paying as a portion of their income.
Thank you. Do you want to say a little bit more about how Ohio is approaching baby bonds? I mean, New Jersey is approaching baby bonds.
Okay, I'm confused for a moment. I don't know much about Ohio right now. Yeah, so last year in his address, Governor Murphy proposed the baby bonds. As Don said in the chat, this is not a new idea. It was actually proposed in New Jersey 20 years ago. Governor Murphy resurrected it and tried to get it passed in our legislature last year. It did not happen. But as I said, we have an election for our governor and all of our state elected officials in November. And so if Governor Murphy is elected, I wouldn't be surprised if the baby bonds proposal came back around in his next 4 years. It's certainly a great idea with a lot of support here in New Jersey.
Thank you. And I guess I should say that both the Grand Challenge to Reduce Extreme Economic Inequality and the Grand Challenge for Financial Capability and Asset Building for All have proposed child development accounts as a policy idea across the board, and starting with something like $1,000 per child would be a great start. So whether it's federal, whether it's local, whether it's state, hopefully these ideas will go into play.
Can I just add something in terms of what Don said earlier about small businesses and low-income people? A few months before the pandemic, we did a focus group with folks who had participated in what is called our Garden State Leaders program, people who've been impacted by poverty and homelessness in New Jersey. And it's a 6-month program. So we did a focus group on kind of like the workforce development initiatives through some of our programs like TANF and SNAP. And basically everyone who participated in this roundtable, around the table, if they had participated in these kinds of activities in the past, said, I never got the help I needed. I didn't get connected to jobs. I didn't get the skills and training I needed. I eventually had to find my own way. And many times that is trying to find these like small gig businesses, right? And developing their own way forward. And so that's why we need to reform all these systems too. And that, as Don pointed out, they're so interconnected.
Totally right, Renee. And we but these are entrepreneurs of necessity because they are being boxed out in so many ways. And so starting a business becomes oftentimes the only real opportunity they see for actually developing asset or wealth and creating some sense of self-sufficiency.
And Don, there was a question in the chat asking about why businesses owned by Black and Brown entrepreneurs didn't get the PPP loans, and maybe if the second and third or future rounds, there are things can be done to make it more equitable.
Yeah, the reasons were, we believe, twofold. One is, in the most part, I mean, this goes back to systemic racism and historical racism. For the most part, in the first round, and unfortunately even in the second round, businesses had to have a relationship with a bank in order to get a PPP loan. They were dealing with their customers first. So if you didn't have a loan with a bank, or you didn't have a significant bank relationship, then you were not, they were not entertaining your application for PPP loans. So that's number one. Second, as I think I referred to, is that for many small businesses, we looked at these numbers. I may have the numbers off, but 40% of them did not have their basic financial information available to them, their P&Ls and historical stuff. If they hadn't filed their taxes in the previous 2 years, they could not apply. And the list kind of just went on about so that they were not eligible to apply. So I think that, so there was the systemic part about not having those relationships. The community development financial institutions that there's a variety, they're all over the country. Some are very large and very significant, and therefore had the assets and had the capital in order to help make loans. But too often, CDFIs, community development financial institutions, are very small, and so they could not take on a number of PPP loan applications because they did not have the capital to support that and to make those initial things. So it's, again, both systemic at both sides, not having the relationship, then not having the business practices in place in order to successfully apply for those loans.
And I'd like to throw a question to all three of you, since you have been working for so many years on the ground, trying to bring equity, trying to pass policies, trying to make life fairer for those who are struggling at the bottom of the economic ladder in your respective locales. What do you think about the distinction between having the opportunity to create your own programs, let's say in New Jersey or Michigan or in your own cities and counties, or having something that's universal and federal that you just implement? Sometimes people say, we want states to have rights, we want states to have autonomy, we don't want the government, forcing people to do certain things. I don't know if you guys had a thought about, do you want to keep fighting on the ground to get what little you can by advocacy, or would you like to have more federal things done and shaped so that you can really spend time working to implement these things to help people? I don't know if you have thoughts on that kind of larger global question, particularly if we're talking about equity.
Well, I'll just say from New Jersey Citizen Action's perspective, we have long been fighting for policies, progressive policies at the state level to influence the national level, right? We're one of the few states who were able to really create noise and successfully defend the Affordable Care Act over the last several years or so, as well as, kind of putting the pressure on these paid leave policies, these more progressive paid leave policies and other things at the federal level. So we would love to see things happen at the federal level and to be able to then kind of bring that back to the state and implement it here. But certainly we're equally comfortable in putting pressure at the federal level from New Jersey.
I did part of what Kevin says. I think it's federal, state, and local, because there's a variety. For instance, at the local level or at the state level, both zoning practices are discriminatory. Single family zoning is a large barrier to creating opportunities for low and moderate income people. As I think Kevin was saying, when adding a rail line and into Montclair, I think that's what you said, that transportation oriented development, that gets gentrified so fast and so often. Again, it's because of the zoning, how the zoning rules, which are very much designed to restrict certain people, low-income people, people of color from moving in. Tax foreclosure and housing foreclosure both are very much systemic racism. Those tax foreclosure in particular, if your house's assessment drops because during a recession, but you're still being taxed at the same level before the rest, you're being cheated, you're being robbed, and you should not have to pay taxes at that level, and then to lose your house through tax foreclosure when you've been essentially illegally taxed for it. Is something that needs to be addressed. So those are local and state work that needs to be done, as well as, again, I think we're talking about the federal level in terms of CRA, Community Reinvestment Act, and putting more pressure on banks. They've extracted wealth from minority communities for literally hundreds of years, and making loan funds available even at lower interest rates, or coming in and putting small grant programs together when you've extracted billions and billions from a community, and now saying you're going to put a $10 million loan fund and feel that you have somehow that this is, I think this is like Kevin saying that's apologizing. Well, no, the apology doesn't work. That money is owed back to the communities from which it was stolen.
Exactly. And that battle keeps going. Just here in New Jersey, I just heard last week, we have 8 pending bank mergers, right? And that further is doing what Don is saying. It's taking that money out of these communities and not providing any supports or anything back into the communities to support the people.
Thank you both.
Which is interesting. I'm sorry, a little over 20 years ago, Chase Manhattan got broken up. So it's kind of funny to hear 20 banks merging now after 20 years ago, we broke up a bank system. Getting the money out to individuals that have their own personal business, and Don had highlighted that good point, that you had to have a relationship with the bank. But the problem, the other thing is that you already registered your business and have an EIN number. So if you're showing you have an EIN number and you have employees, why do you have to show that you have this strong relationship with a bank when you are establishing a business? It just seems like passing, it's, to me, in my ears, and as a former business owner in Manhattan, that's passing the buck. If I show that I am paying my employees and all of a sudden the economy turns, which coincidentally, I bought my business in the middle of Manhattan 3 weeks before they announced the market crash or that we were in a recession. I'm saying this from experience. If you have an EIN and I'm showing you I got 10 employees and all of a sudden my business is taking on water, I just got my business. I'm trying to keep myself and these 10 people afloat. But you're telling me that I don't have a history or a connection strong enough with a bank. So sorry, no life preserver for you. You're gonna sink. You open your business at the wrong time. And I think that's an injustice in itself. I think there needs to be more assessment of the business, whether or not the business could be profitable, and how many people are going to be affected by your closure of a business. It can't just be the same old template of banking where it's like, show me 2 years of profit. Sometimes you don't show 2 years of profit. And especially the economic downturn, you have to keep people afloat. And that is the hallmark of, or the template of a decent society. And if you can't show that kind of concern for those individuals that have the spirit, entrepreneurial spirit, to go out there and create jobs, not just wealth for themselves, but create a stable economy for individuals for their own homes, then we're failing. We're only going to be successful to those that have a long history and enough backing and enough investors behind them versus the single mother that wants to create her own hair salon. I mean, that's, I think, honestly, and there've been so many different historical highlights that you could look. I think that's part of the if you really look at it, part of the part of a systematic. I don't want to get into say systematic racism, but I think part of it is. I think part of it is systematic, and I think it could go into, if you look at it, a little bit of racism in there, where if you own a small business and you don't have strong enough ties, sorry, because those big banks are sometimes not in the poorest communities.
Well, I am so sorry to say that we are just about out of time. I'd like to thank Renee and Kevin and Don for sharing your expertise. Hopefully, if you're willing, if questions come afterwards and we send them to you, you'll be willing to respond, because it seems like you all have such a wealth of information. I'm going to turn it back over to Marie in just a second, but I do have one announcement to make. Our grand challenge to reduce extreme economic inequality is having a webinar next Tuesday on August 24th from 1 to 2:15. It's all going to be around income support. If you've heard about child allowances, universal basic income, we have a panel that's going to talk about where these things exist throughout the country. And so hopefully Kira or someone from Grand Challenge will send this out to everybody who's on this webinar so you can hear about it, but keep your eyes open for that. And with that, I will turn it back over to Marie. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you.
Oh,
I am so impressed by the work happening in your offices, and see this as a model of what can be done to make forward progress. We want to thank everyone for attending, and especially the UTA School of Social Work for hosting the webinar series and the Grand Challenges of Social Work for its leadership as well. And I would just have to thank everyone on the National Webinar Committee and Grand Challenges. We hope to see many of you at the September 14th webinar, which will focus on ending homelessness and eradicating social isolation. There are webinars through the month of December, and with that lively audience, we want you to come back. Thank you.
all right. It looks like the registration for part 4 is already in the chat. And then some of our panelists, Renee and Don, have also put their email addresses in the chat if you have questions to follow up on all the good work they're doing. Trina, I don't know if you wanted to put your date in the chat as well, but I'm sure Kira's on here, so she might be able to forward that information. So I want to thank you all again for gracing us with your presence and your information. I'm impressed as well. Quincy, did you have anything else that you wanted to finish with? I think we have.
No, great job. I appreciate everyone sharing their experience and look forward to continuing our work together.
All right. Thank you guys. Okay, so Trina put in August 24th, 1 to 2:15. All right. All right. Thanks, everybody. I think
I'm just going to leave it up just a second to give everyone a chance to copy the link in case they need it in the chat.
okay. Gotcha.
Thank you all.
All right. Thank you.
Keep up the amazing
Have a
work.
blessed day, everybody. Thank you again.
Appreciated meeting you, Renee and Kevin. Thank you so much. You're gone.
Thanks so much, Trina. Thanks, Marie, for holding this down. I see you, Laura. So thanks as well. There's so much going on. I love it.
There is. Getting that local flavor is so much better than kind of looking at the Tuesday plate. Particularly what Kevin said, yeah, it's been 2 times as long for a long time. Let me tell you what I know about what's going on in Jersey.
This was just fabulous.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think there's just so much. I mean, it could be, a 2-hour webinar to just continue talking about it and all the nuances, because I think there's that audience like Laura, Trina, Quincy that are just really deep in this conversation. But for people like me, like that are focused on other grand challenges and kind of know about this stuff generally, it's like, yes, this is the stuff. And I love that it's in a social work frame, right? So that's the exciting thing as well. So All right. Well, thanks again. I want to stay on just to keep saying thanks because I think well. But I'll let you go. I'll sign off. Thanks, Coral. Thanks, UTA folks behind the scenes. So.
And Jandel and Quincy, thank you for coming to us and letting us partner with you on this. I'm glad it worked out.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We need more of it.
Yeah, I agree. So I think that'll be a pattern going forward. Sue made say, are there any grand challenges in California? So I'm not sure what that question means. What do y'all think?
Well, the grand challenges are nationwide, and so people from throughout the country. But I know on the West Coast, they had a Western Consortium, which was like California, Washington, Oregon. I don't know exactly what states. But I don't know if they've had another one since the pandemic. I think the last one they had was like 2019. But I can connect you. I mean, USC is the university that is really connected to Grand Challenges. So if you want to connect to some of the faculty at USC, they can at least let you know what's going on in California.
And the spearhead for the September webinar actually is on faculty at USC. Terrence, is it Fitzgerald's? So I think that might be the question. Sue might be saying, well, you know what, we get to highlight Ohio and New Jersey. When are we going to highlight California, right? So maybe that's what she's saying. So maybe it'll be the next webinar.
So if Sue goes onto the Grand Challenge website and clicks on resources, there's tons of information there and you can see who's doing what where. Also, subscribing to that list will give you updates in the newsletter. So every time someone's having something around the Grand Challenges, you'll actually get an alert and you can stay up to date on it through your email. So that's pretty cool. That's why everyone should sign up.
All right. Thanks.